Hello, hello. Welcome to Legal Candy. I am Attorney Candice Colucci, and we are in today's legal feast begins with a deep dive into the ongoing legal odyssey of Derek Chauvin, the ex-police officer at the heart of the George Floyd case. If everybody remembers that. So brace yourself for this unexpected twist, because Chauvin, who's now behind bars, serving 21 years, is making headlines again. Reports have emerged that there's been a stabbing incident within the prison walls, adding a new layer of complexity to this case that has shocked the world and incited a worldwide race riot. So we will give you guys some more information about that in today's episode. But first, I want to start by doing our legal disclaimer, right? Because I can't forget that. So before we delve into today's legal confections, a quick reminder, the information provided is for general information purposes only and should not be construed as legal advice. It is not intended to substitute for or replace professional legal advice tailored to your specific needs and situations. If you require legal advice or assistance, consult with a qualified attorney. Although I am one, this does not create an attorney-client relationship by listening to the show. So now let's dive into it. Today, we've got Mary Catherine, who's here from our office, from Colucci Law Group. Mary Catherine is a paralegal in our office, and she's also our content writer. And so she has been just feverishly preparing for these shows and getting us all the information. So she's been a great added resource. So hello, Mary Catherine.
Hello.
Hello. I like that voice. Mm-hmm. And then I have a special guest here today who's near and dear to my heart, is Darby Metcalf. And Darby, we've talked about this before, is that Darby has worked for us for years for our family businesses. So we've got Club Piranha in Ybor, Tampa, Florida, and she is one of our head bartenders, just organizational staff. She does our events. She really does everything. And then I had the pleasure a couple years ago to have her as a legal intern in my office, and she was just immensely helpful. So Darby, say hello.
Hello, guys. May I say it's a pleasure being on here today. I'm very happy to be here.
We are so happy to have you. I'm so happy that you're here. And so what are you doing now, Darby?
So I maintain my position at the club in Ybor, and then I also am a second-year law student at Cooley Law.
Yay! That is huge. I mean, it's not Stetson where I went. It's still really good law school. Just we like to boast about it. But she is at Cooley, which is a great law school, and so I am so excited that you're in law school. I tried to talk her. No, I wouldn't say I tried to talk her out of it. I didn't. Everyone tried to talk me out of it, and here I am now. Years later, still practicing and stressed as can be, but trying to fight the good fight to help people. So I'm happy that you're in law school. So what prompted you to go to law school?
I actually have an undergrad in health science, and I was really suited for the medical field. And I was actually a life-altering phenomenon just happened to me where I was just over the bureaucracies of the medical field, and I went to legal counsel over a malpractice suit, and it just really opened my eyes to the legal world and really changed my whole direction in life and what I felt like I was destined to do. And that's what really brought me here today, and I've never been happier with my decision.
Good. So you're in law school, and I remember it was super stressful.
I've had my doubts. Everyone says the first year is your hardest, where you cry every other day and question
of course.
What you're doing with your mental health and what prompted you to even do this. You kind of lose focus, but you kind of regain yourself. I think if you're meant to be in it in your second year and your third year, and it all kind of comes to fruition.
Do you know why they do that? And now it all makes sense. It all comes full circle, is that they make the first year so incredibly difficult, and they are in your face. I mean, they will call on you randomly and ask you the most in-depth questions, and you'll feel embarrassed in front of other people, and you'll be like sick at night because you're like, I want to make sure I'm prepped enough for it. And the whole reason is it's supposed to say, if you can make it through this year, then you can make it through being a lawyer, because that's just a piece of what it's like when you're actually practicing.
Absolutely. I think making sure you're anxiety-ridden just puts you on your toes at all times, because it prepares you for real-life scenarios when the judge calls on you to answer motions or pleadings that you've put in front of them, and you're on the spot. And I think that's what the Socratic method is meant to do.
Yeah, absolutely. Because it was everything that they had prepped you for. I remember it was just very days that I felt I felt the same thing. Like you didn't feel like you could put any more information to your brain, and you couldn't really overcome that type of stress and fear that you were feeling. But if you can do it, then you'll make it. So you're you finished your year 2, right? You're in year 2 now.
I finished up my first year. I'm finishing up my first semester of my second year at law school. Everything's going really well. I'm not crying as much. So.
Good. That's always a good sign. If you're not crying as much, then I think that you're on a win. I think that's like, it goes up from there. So that is good. I'm happy that you're here because we have Darby, because we are going to be talking about some legal issues regarding the George Floyd case. And so, and Darby, who is just doing criminal procedures and learning all about your criminal rights, your constitutional rights, we're going to be able to talk about some of those because it's important that people know them, because until I went to law school, there were so many things I didn't know that we were entitled to, like that were created in order to protect us. And that's the whole thing about law, is that the more you know, the more empowered that you feel, the more less victimized arguably you'll be. And that's the reason why that I felt the motivation to go to law school, was to figure out a way to take that knowledge for myself, but also be able to help others. So now that Darby's here, we're going to be able to go through some of it, and she'll be able to give us some of her thoughts and questions that she may have from what she was seeing, because we are now kind of unraveling the George Floyd case with Derek Chauvin, who has now been stabbed. So let's go into a little bit of those details. And this is a very heart-wrenching topic. I remember when it all first happened. May 25th, 2020 is when this took place. And it was such a civil unrest that took place afterwards in a time that I think shocked a lot of us, because the fact that it was right for the time. It was on camera. There was body cams. And so we got to see it from so many different angles. And so we got to watch it kind of unravel and unplay step by step by step with George Floyd. So when talking about now that Derek is in custody and now he's been stabbed, let's go back through kind of what took place in the actual the actual incidents that took place with George Floyd. So we're at May 25th, 2020. And you guys remember it? Do you remember like it was yesterday?
It felt like 9/11.
Yeah.
Where
right?
you remember
Where
exactly what was happening, and it shocked you.
And I think what was so shocking to people was that, I think because for me, when I was watching it again, because I went back through it all again just recently when we were talking about this story, and it was so emotional, is that it was a really weird premonition that George Floyd had of the entire thing taking place. And so if we want to take you back through that moment, what takes place is George Floyd's in Minneapolis, and he actually goes into a convenience store, and he allegedly uses a $20 counterfeit bill, and then there's some kind of situation that takes place where they don't let him use the bill. The cashier, who becomes heart-wrenching when he takes the stand and testifies, this cashier, is that the cashier turns around and says, it says that the bill is fake. Hold on one second. The bill's fake, so he tells his manager. And so the manager ultimately calls the police department. The police department comes to investigate. And George Floyd, when the police first get there, that we can see in the video, is that when police first get there, is George Floyd's back inside of his vehicle, and he's sitting in the driver's side, and the police come up, and they come up just to begin with a gun out. I remember that's like the very first thing. They come out with a gun, and they're banging on the door, and the very first thing that the police officer says, as we're kind of going through it again, is he says, "Get the F out of the car." I mean, that's literally like the very first thing out of this officer's mouth is a curse word, which most people know I'm a fan of them. I use them on my daily life, but not in a professional setting. And definitely not when we've realized that a police officer's obligation is to de-escalate a situation. Mm-hmm. So the very first thing is he's telling him to get the F out of the car, and he's going, "Put your effing hands up, get the F out of the car." He says it over and over again to him. And George Floyd's beginning pleads, which seem, when you look at it now, Monday morning quarterbacking, it's devastating to hear. But when I remember hearing it for the first time, I remember thinking, why is he so nervous? I'm like, this is a regular routine investigation. But what he's saying is he's saying, I'm sorry, I've been shot before by a police officer. That's what he was saying, is that there had been a prior incident, which I don't think we ever realized if that was actually fact or not, but he definitely had a sensitivity. He said that he had a prior incident where he had been shot or shot out by a police officer, so he was afraid of cops. And so he's reluctant to get out of the car. They finally get him out, and they drag him out of the car. And there's this struggle for the longest time to try to get him arrested, because he's a pretty large, kind of stocky guy. He's tall. 6'6". He's 6'6". He's over muscular. Yeah, he's muscular. And a lot of the beginning interaction with the police officer is kind of one-on-one at that point in time of them trying to get him restrained. What they very first start asking, even then at the very beginning, is they're asking him, are you under the influence of anything? They have this suspicion that maybe he has taken something. So let's first talk about some of the legal rights there. Probable cause. Tell us about probable cause, Darby.
Probable cause is on a scale of where you have the lower end being reasonable articulate suspicion, and then you have below that is such as a hunch. Probable cause gives an officer necessarily the right to go and investigate and figure out evidence regarding to de-escalate the situation and dismiss any type of legal finalities that might interpret a crime happening. So an officer is going to have probable cause and is going to elicit a response from a victim or the accused by going to them and asking them certain questions to de-escalate the situation.
Good, very good. Listen, Cooley is doing you well. I'll give them props there. That was very good.
Shout out to Professor Swartz.
Oh, okay. Oh, it's Professor Swartz. Listen, don't be shouting out on this show. I'm just kidding. No, listen. Anyone teaching anybody the law I'm a fan of them. So, that's what people talk about a lot. Is they go, well, did they have probable cause? In this instance, the probable cause would have been the fact that they got a phone call from the gas station that had said there had been a $20 counterfeit bill. I think the police go in, they get the bill. I think the whole issue was that the bill, there had been one of those pens that they had rubbed over it and it didn't rub the right color. And so that now creates that probable cause that there's enough articulatable evidence that they can go to the next step of now doing some sort of, under your Fourth Amendment right, a search and seizure. So they're now allowed to now engage with the potential defendant, the potential human being they think may have committed this crime, and further their investigation and determine that if they think that they've got everything they need, they can go ahead and do arrest. If they think that they've met the elements of the crime, they can go ahead and do an arrest, or they can just do more investigation. At that point in time, it seems everything's all aligned, that they've got probable cause, they've got video that he was in the store, so they've got everything they need now to arrest him for a counterfeit bill. And that's what they're intending on doing, arresting him for that. So what ends up taking place is there is no doubt that there is resistance. And I think that's where a lot of it hinged between, it broke my heart that they're turned into this big racial divide, because that's what really happened. And I really think that everybody should have been together to say what ended up taking place was wrong. That's it. That's really what it should have been. But what ended up happening was everybody was fighting each other. And I was really feeling like I don't think the information is being disseminated in a way that the public is understanding what went wrong here. So to kind of give you an idea is sometimes officers, let me just start by saying, officers have a very difficult job to do. What they go through sometimes, they get harassed, they're risking their lives, people are ungrateful for the service that they do. So I tip my hats to every single police officer and all of that they do. It is hard to be in their shoes. It is also even more difficult to determine what you're going to do when everything goes wrong, right?
Every situation's different.
Yeah, every situation's different. Even though they get trained, and most of us can say there's not enough training. It's no matter how much training you do, it's hard to train for every single event that could possibly take place. And just like human beings, an officer is no different. in that moment, it's sometimes hard to figure out what should you do that protects you. You have an obligation to protect yourself. You have an obligation to protect this person that you now have in custody, right? You're learning that because now there's a heightened responsibility the officer has when he takes somebody into custody. But you also have a responsibility to protect the public around you, everybody else around you. So as an officer, you're trying to juggle all of these things at once. And it becomes overwhelming to where a lot of times I see footage because I did criminal defense, and there were times when I felt that the officer's behavior was excessive. And after this event, I was very adamant about the fact that I was part of trying to make the conversation alive to the government and officials that there should be a mandatory body cam on every officer. It just should be. I think we could figure out a way to do the resources for it. I think it's a must. And I think that there could be more oversight on how do we correct those actions. What are the consequences for them to maybe try to curb it ending up being in a criminal trial of an officer? Because that is never what should have happened. I don't believe that Derek Chauvin woke up that day and thought, I'm going to kill somebody. That's what I want to do. And I don't think that when he sat in that position, he thought, I'm going to kill this man. I just think he got very irresponsible, very messy, and wasn't listening to the situation around. And a lot of times there's ego involved and just, well, you didn't listen to me. You didn't listen to me. So now I'm going to do whatever it is I feel I need to do. So I feel like all that kind of cultivates together to sometimes bring us to the unfortunate event of somebody ending up dead. So we are going to go into our first commercial break. So stay with us. And we are actually going to listen to some of the body cam video of George Floyd to get a better idea of what was taking place in the last moments of his death. Welcome back. So we are talking about George Floyd. So what takes place is after George Floyd is pulled out of the vehicle, he is pleading over and over again. He starts talking about how fearful he is, and what he starts saying is, "Don't shoot me. Don't shoot me. Don't shoot me." And it's arrest for a counterfeit bill.
Everything is judged on the reasonable person standard, and I think in this situation that's reasonable. He has a prejudice against police officers, and you have to look at the totality of the circumstances. It's a counterfeit $20 bill. Mm-hmm. Did it really require as much force as the police officers were giving him at this moment? Yeah,
exactly. And it's a good point you make, is because that's what ends up taking place that I think people just really didn't understand is it okay to resist an officer? No, it's not. It is one of the things that when I've gone into the youth department and spoken to our youths, I have literally said verbatim out of my mouth, do not resist arrest. You've got to take the arrest at the time it's happening, and then later on we can try to unravel it. You resisting arrest is going to do no benefit from you. You're not going to get away from them. They're not going to go, well, they are resisted, so we're going to go ahead and drop the charges. It's not going to happen at all. It always escalates the situation. But just like you said, is the reason why there has to be trained officers who handle those situations correctly, because there are people who have prejudices or a history, a negative history. Somebody they love has been killed by an officer, or like George Floyd was saying, that he had been in an incident before. So he's someone who has his own mental issues with why he feels like he's not complying with the officers, which doesn't make it right. But it should be met with the proper training to combat that. The response shouldn't have been death. So he does resist. And what I remember when I first watched this, which I think is one of the biggest kind of hiccups, is that they actually get him into the back of the vehicle, but they don't like that he's still flailing around. This was the part that kind of upset me the most, because I can tell you that I have seen, it's not all officers, I can absolutely tell you that, but I have seen it with my own eyes, where officers are sort of like parents sometimes, where it's like, if you don't listen to what I've said, then I'm kind of going to react in a way that's not so helpful to you, you know? So when they yank him back out of the car, and I'm like, he's already resisting. You've got him in the back of the truck. Close the doors. That's why it's been built that way. That's where I believe, from my legal analysis, the very first inappropriate behavior took place there, because they had him in a facility where he was now not a danger to anyone. And now the only problem is he potentially could be a danger to himself, but is already was handcuffed. And then they go to yank him back out of it. And then that's when this whole thing ensues right outside of the cop car. So what ends up taking place is he's still resisting. He's now saying that he's not going to resist, but he's still kind of flailing around. And it takes 3 cops. So you've got Derek Chauvin, who now is kneeling on his neck. Then you've got another officer who's on his back. And then you've got a third officer who's got his knees. And so this is what it sounds like. And remember, this was the point that I thought people really needed to know. They held him down like that for 9 minutes. 9 minutes. 9 minutes. When I went to some of the protests and the rallies afterwards, when the civil unrest kind of took place afterwards, there was one that I went to that I feel like affected me in a way in my core. Was we sat for silence for 9.5 minutes. There was probably 2,000 people in Tampa, and it was 9.5 minutes where nobody said anything. And we thought about what that would have felt like for someone to be crushing your windpipe. And that's what was happening to him. And so this is what it sounded like. So he says over and over again that he can't breathe, and he is telling them this. And the officers, I think there were so many times in this videos where the officers' responses were absolutely what you would have hoped an officer's responses never were. They were emotionless. They could have cared less. Their answer to him when he says he can't breathe is that you obviously have enough oxygen to say that. That must mean you can breathe. Mm-hmm. And that to me was just like the insult to injury. And then you have all of the bystanders who are also saying, he's now not moving. He's now motionless. You've got to do something about it. And so he sits there not moving for an additional 3 minutes. That he's had no movement at all, and he's unconscious, and they still have made no attempt to turn him over and then revive him. So that's where I think people got so confused about it and got so just kind of separated, was when I remember I was going back through some of the things that I had screenshotted a long time ago, and one of the posts I remember seeing somewhere, it said, if he had followed the directions of the officers, he would be alive today. But no, he resisted the officers. That was, I think, the pivotal divide between human beings, was that they felt that because of what he did, that it resulted in death. And that's not what the legal standards are and the responsibilities of an officer. The responsibilities of an officer are, there are people who are going to resist, who believe they shouldn't be arrested, who believe that they haven't committed a crime. He may not, number one is, he may not have known that the money was counterfeit. I've gotten counterfeit money before. I think we all have.
Oh, yeah. Most
how many
definitely.
times? Yeah, at the club all the time.
Most definitely.
We get counterfeit money. And it's easy for us to turn around and give to somebody else. And it's not uncommon for you to go to somebody and all of a sudden, if you start trying to arrest him and he has no idea what he's being charged for them to resist back. So to say that because he resisted, he deserved to die in this fashion of yelling for his mom. He tells the officer at the beginning his mom had just died. So then he starts calling for his mom at the end, and then he takes his last breath on the ground, and still with officers all along his back, while people are still on the bystanders saying he can't breathe anymore, he's dead, please, can you guys please help him, all of these other things. And unfortunately, George Floyd dies at that moment.
Isn't it Isn't it a duty, Attorney Colucci, of a police officer to provide medical aid? Isn't that one of their duties too?
Yes. And so that becomes one of the pivotal issues there is that, one, you have a duty as an officer to provide a medical attention, but you have an even heightened duty to provide that once you put them in your custody and care. And that's what happens there, is that he's now in their custody and care. And now when he's saying these things, I can't breathe and all of that stuff, they should have turned him over and rendered that type of care. So talking about your constitutional right. So let's talk about where does, and this was what people were trying to grasp is, and it's so heartbreaking. I'm heartbroken for the family of George Floyd. I'm heartbroken for every single person who ever watched that, whether white or black, and felt like that could have been them. I'm so upset about the divide that it created between the world, but also for these officers. I am heartbroken for all of them. I get it. They become desensitized when they see it every single day, when they're dealing with it every single day. It is easy to get desensitized and to stop looking at people as a human being and having empathy and sympathy for them, and start looking them as a defendant case number and going, I need to get this person off the street, and because he's not listening, now I'm going to do this. I'm going to make his cuffs a little bit tighter. I'm going to yank him around a little bit more. I'm going to bump his head when he gets into the car. I mean, it's kind of human nature, that discretion. But there is a line upon which an officer goes from doing their legal duty as an officer of the law to now being criminally responsible. And it has to do with your Fourth Amendment right, which you just learned about. Tell me about it.
Your Fourth Amendment right is the unreasonable searches and seizures. And here, this also is going to protect from unreasonable force from a government actor, such as a police officer. And here, this goes beyond the scope of what unreasonable would be for the officer arresting George Floyd with how much force he used.
Yes.
And I must say that also the comment in the police and what they said, I don't believe this ignorance to empathy negates their duty. Just because they're desensitized doesn't negate them from giving this duty of care that is part of their jobs.
For sure. It's definitely not going to negate it. It's just trying to see it from the perspective and going, okay, I understand it to a degree. It's like when you sometimes see, it's really hard. You had those teachers in school where you knew that they were fed up, and it was like, and they didn't care. It was like you tell them a story about your homework or what happened, and they were just not wanting to hear it. And it's because they had been so desensitized. And you don't know if it means they need to take a break, because you're right. It doesn't negate the legal duty that you have to treat me fairly, to abide by the standards of care.
To honestly act like a human being.
Yeah. Yep. And you know what else I had heard, and I said it a couple of times, was, and this was also something that just drove me nuts that I heard, is when people were like, well, black people are killing people all the time. And I'm like, if you don't see the difference between two black people on the streets killing each other and an officer killing a black person, then I don't know where we go from there, because it's the duty that this officer had. It's the fact that we gave him a badge and said, you have now a heightened responsibility to make sure the people around you stay safe. And degradation of that duty is going to unfortunately put you into criminal proceedings, which is what happens here. So you have the Fourth Amendment that says you will not be subject to unreasonable searches and seizures or excessive force, which is where this whole entire thing accumulates from. So it's determined. So what ends up happening kind of right afterwards, if you guys kind of remember, because I remember when they made the announcement, is right afterwards, the first announcement that's made is the police issue a statement saying Floyd died after a medical incident. A medical incident was what was first said. And that gives me goosebumps, because I honestly think it's that moment that sparked this racial injustice to it, is that the police department had these body cams, and thank God for them. Because I'll tell you, every department does not have body cams at all. Most of the cities around you, in the county that you're in, the city you're in, they do not have body cams. Some of them have some body cams. Where we're at, there's a couple cities that have, like, some of the officers have body cams, but not all of them. There is, I was very, very adamant about the fact that I believe that the body cams should not be turned off by an officer. That's a huge thing. We have officers that are turning off body cams, but thank God for the body cams. The statement that was issued by police, the same police that had access to those body cams, that could have watched them immediately, they make this statement, and I think that is where that insult to injury that came to everybody, that said, how dare you not value this life and are not going to hold these officers responsible. And so they then very quickly after that, they determine that they announce that they're going to do criminal charges, and they start by charging Chauvin. So he ends up going to trial on unintentional second-degree murder, third-degree murder, and second-degree manslaughter. So we'll go into those. We'll first talk about the difference between civil and criminal. Civil and criminal. So the family does sue the city of Minneapolis civilly. So civilly means that we're holding an entity responsible for this, monetarily responsible most of the time. But civil does not have any criminal penalties. Nobody's going to jail when a civil procedures take place. It is a lower standard, so it's easier to win a civil case than it is a criminal case. And what happened in that civil case?
The civil case, the family of Floyd, they went ahead and settled with the city of Minneapolis, and for $27 million.
$27 million. Money does not bring back a life, but they did it really quickly, too. I think it was really clear to the city that, and they immediately fired almost all the officers. I think all three of them, all four of them get fired immediately. And I think they realized that pretty quick on that we are very responsible for this. It was very obvious. And just the lack of remorse in the situation of a whole made the entire city just look like they were poorly qualified and poorly trained, which I know is not true to all everybody. It just was a very, very bad look on the situation. So they settle the civil suit, and that's what happened. So you can sue somebody and then you can settle. So they end up settling the civil suit, and then the criminal case is what starts to proceed forward. What I think is interesting too is how much unravels about this chokehold. So that's what they're saying that Chauvin was doing, he's doing a form of a chokehold. I think the actual word there's an actual word for
like asphyxiation.
Yeah, it's like they're calling it something positional asphyxiation. What they called him, but he died from. But there's an actual thing about how he was on his neck. But the Minneapolis, everyone starts kind of moving. We've got the civil rights now involved because it has to do with potentially, they say it has to do potentially is racially motivated because he was an African American. Civil rights are involved. Federal courts are involved. So the federal government is involved because there's an allegation that a civil rights has been violated.
A federal question.
Yes, it becomes a federal question. So state is going to have jurisdiction over state laws, and there are certain laws that we determine are higher and should be regulated by the federal government. And so the state laws were the murder and those kind of things, but the federal laws that were violated were the violation of the civil rights of being given aid when you're in custody in the excessive force. So he's being charged in state court, and state crimes and federal crimes. And so it ends up getting prepared and everything starts now going forward to trial. Now, what takes place before a trial happens is that there is usually talks about potential plea deals. And that will be the state attorney or the prosecutor, when there's a couple words in different states of how they do it, and the defense will start to talk back and forth and try to come to a plea agreement. And was there a plea agreement in this case?
Initially, the plea agreement was that he wanted to go to federal prison instead of state because it's inherently safer. And that's in respect to Derek Chauvin. But they initially was a 10-year.
10 years. So there was actually an agreement that both parties had agreed that he was going to go to federal prison and that he was going to plead guilty to murder. They said there has to be a plea deal that has him pleading guilty to murder, and that he would go for 10 years. And what happens after a plea deal is that usually the judge has to now agree to it. But what ends up happening is the lead, I think, federal prosecutor, once it goes up the ladder, is he says, no way. No way are we going to let him go with 10 years. So I think we've got to go to our last break of the hour, come back, and we will talk about what takes place during the trial, why is he eventually found guilty, and now what's the aftermath. We are back. Okay, so we are talking about the George Floyd. So Mary Catherine just did a little research and told us what that is. It's called a blood chokehold. That's exactly what an MMA fighter had testified actually at trial and talked about. So he goes to trial on these charges because the plea deal gets rejected. The world is in absolute just chaos at this time, because now it becomes this whole entire idea of, yes, they're charging him, but I think that the fear really stemmed from the fact that they were almost not going to, had it not been for all of these cameras that became very clear of what took place. And I think that became the injustice that the African American community was feeling, that we're not being treated fairly, that there's no equal rights that are happening here. And look what's happening when it happens to us, when it happens to somebody else, and this white on black crime. And people were all over just completely up in arms about what was taking place. And so that becomes an issue too with the jury selection. So as we're going through this whole entire process, is one of the things is that there was a change of venue, right?
Yeah, there was a denial and change of venue on behalf of Mr. Chauvin, which the judge erred in deciding that.
Okay. So what that's talking about is one of the things that you'll see sometimes is that there will be a request to change the venue, because one of the constitutional rights that a defendant has in a case is to have a fair trial. And so, and a fair trial happens, one of the pieces is that you have the right to have a jury that is not biased against you, that they haven't been given information before about the case, which is really hard in some areas. But most of the time, one of the biggest kind of correlations trial attorneys will look towards, because we've done this before when I was doing criminal defense, is if there's a case that becomes high profile in that city, and we believe, and we're going to present it to the court, that there's no way that my client can get a fair trial because everybody here and around this area already knows about the facts of the case. And this is huge because people don't understand this about, and we'll talk more about it, but what comes in at trial is governed by the rules. There are very, very strict rules that says not everything that's happened, not every piece of evidence is allowed to come into trial. And so that's the reason why the jury has to be clean ears. They have to have not heard about this before, because they don't want they don't want any information they heard from, some opinion on a radio station or what we're doing right now. They don't want them to have heard information that is potentially incorrect, that hasn't been filtered through the rules of evidence before it got to their ears, and isn't going to prejudice them against the defendant. So one of the things that will happen is when you're in an area and you think that the city knows about it way too much, you'll request on behalf of your defendant, is you'll say, we need to move this venue. And that's what Chauvin had asked for, was a moving a venue. Obviously, I don't know if there had ever been a more opportunity that makes more sense that you would have asked for it. The last time I think I remember it being asked for was a big case where it had been asked for in the news was what's her name? Anthony.
Oh, Casey Anthony. Huge case in Orlando.
And she had requested a change of venue because everybody there knew about the case. And the argument is she wasn't going to be prejudiced by that. So jury selections happens, the case starts to unravel, and they start bringing in witnesses. There were 400 witnesses that were on the potential witness list. 400 people. This is crazy.
What a task.
What an insane, I mean, just writing it out. I couldn't imagine. So they ended up the prosecution ended up calling 38 people to actually testify. But they had potentially had 400 depending on what angle that they were going to take in the case. And this is some of the quotes that came from that opening statement. So the opening statement of a trial is the very beginning part with where the state is going to put on an idea. I always say it's like the book summary. It's telling you what's going to potentially take place in the case. And as a trial attorney, trained by Stetson Law, yes, my little shout out there, but on behalf of our trial team trained there, is one of the things is what we like to do in our opening statement is build the puzzle, is to tell people this is what the puzzle's going to look like at the end. And then we're going to tell them how you're going to get all of your pieces. So then as the trial goes on, they're getting little pieces and they're putting it into this puzzle piece that we've already put in their mind. So they know where every piece goes. So one of the things the prosecution said is that Mr. Chauvin had betrayed his badge. And that Chauvin did exactly, and then as the defense said, that Chauvin did exactly what he had been trained to do. That is the difference between the two sides. The prosecution is saying he's betrayed everything he was supposed to do in that moment, while the other side's going, he didn't betray it. He did exactly what he had been trained to do. So you have those two sides, and now they're both putting on evidence of exactly what they believe kind of took place. So we are definitely going to run out of time today. So we're going to probably have to roll this over to another episode to talk about it. But I know we've got a couple more minutes, so we'll keep on going. But because I didn't think it was going to, I'm like, we're trying to go through it and we want people to really understand what took place as it's up in the news right now, so they can feel kind of empowered by that information. But so the charges, we'll go over the charges. Unintentional second-degree murder was the first charge. That's causing the death of another person without intent while committing or attempting to commit another felony. That is one of the charges that the officer, Mr. Chauvin, was charged with. How they fulfilled that is they were stating that they argued that Mr. Chauvin unintentionally killed George Floyd while committing the felony of assault in the third degree. So they're saying that assault is to put somebody in an apprehension of fear, to put somebody else in the moment that they feel that they're in the fear of imminent death or bodily harm. So if you tell someone, I'm going to shoot you, and you put a gun up, the moment before you pull that trigger is an assault. That's an assault. It's a split second is the assault. When people say assault and battery, the assault part of it, I know this is one of the things we learned in law school.
Yes, this is everyone gets
I don't think I ever knew what an assault was. I thought that they were really together. I just thought, assault and battery, and assault and battery. I didn't realize that the assault part really is that split second until you're in law school. And you learn that.
And battery is like the physical touching.
Yes, exactly. So the assault is like literally that moment before the fear. It's when someone says they're in fear of imminent, it has to be about to happen, that they're in fear of their life or being harmed. That is an assault. So they charge him with that. That would be the assault part of it. And I would imagine this is where we're looking at it, is the assault part's going to be when Mr. Chauvin has his knee on George Floyd's neck, and George Floyd is literally grasping for air and all of that stuff. I'd say the battery is all there. That's it. The assault would be any of the moments kind of right before that is pretty much where it is. So they're about to put him to custody. All of those kind of things is kind of probably where the assault's at. So that is the unintentional second-degree murder. The third-degree murder. They also charge him with third-degree murder. The elements there are acting with a depraved mind and causing the death of another by an act dangerous to others and enticing a depraved disregard for human life. So when we talk about depraved is morally corrupt and wicked. morally corrupt and wicked.
I just think he was absolutely reckless.
Yeah. Yeah. And so reckless is actually almost even it's along the same words, but it's almost even like a little bit step below. Like being reckless is like not thinking about it. Like you're just
depraved seems more methodical.
Depraved is so,
You
depraved
really...
is so just like, it's just sick kind of how it kind of looks. So the depraved mind. And how they end up proving that was that the prosecution argued and the jury ended up agreeing that Chauvin's actions of kneeling on George Floyd's neck showed a reckless disregard for human life and constituted third-degree murder. That moment of where you watch George Floyd pleading for his life, saying he can't breathe, all of those things, that the act of him still keeping his knee on his neck was a depraved mind, and that caused his death. Then the other charge that he was charged with was second-degree murder, and that is culpable negligence, creating an unreasonable risk and taking chances of causing death or great bodily harm. So in every state's a little bit different how they do it. In this state, they were able to charge him with the higher crime and all of the lessers included. And then he can be found guilty on all of them, and he can get sentences for all of them. So which ended up happening. He ends up getting a couple different sentences, and they run them all concurrently, which means together. Instead of consecutively, which that can be the option sometimes, is a judge will maybe decide or the jury decides to run them consecutively after each other. In this case, they were concurrent. But in like Florida, we're looking at it and we go, what's the highest one? So we could charge somebody with all of them, but really whatever becomes the highest one, the highest charge, he's going to be getting that unless the elements meet a different like charge. So in this instance, he ends up one of the lower levels is going to be manslaughter. So manslaughter is really where that negligence comes into fact, where they're saying that you're now taking these risks that you may not have intended this murder to happen, but because you violated your duty of care, which was to protect him and to make sure that he was getting medical attention, that led to the death. And the specific facts behind that were that he didn't provide necessary medical assistance, and continuing to restrain Floyd showed culpable negligence leading to Floyd's death. This is kind of where I when I looked back and watched the video again, which is just, it's so heart-wrenching to think that his family had to watch it, the world had to watch it. It was such a stain, I think, on just America. And I felt just so helpless for him and the people around him, but also for the police department, which I know they would never want this to be what they look like. But when they spent that entire time, 3 of them holding this man down, I kept on thinking, what were they waiting for? What is it they were waiting for? If they already tried to put him into the back of a cop car and then decided that they were just going to, because he wouldn't stay still, even though he got in the back of the cop car, then they drag him out, and now they're holding him down. I just remember when I first watched it thinking, what is it you guys are waiting for? They did call for medical attention. They started off with the 911 call. I mean, the non-emergency, actually. They called it in as non-emergency. And then they upgraded, I think a couple minutes later, somebody else calls because there's other officers around. It says now it's an emergency once they realize that he's not breathing. But it didn't really fit to me. What is it that they were intending on doing? Were they putting him into another squad car? Or did they really maybe believe that he was under the influence of something, which there was continuous questions about that, and that they wanted the ambulance to come and take him? That's one of the things that I think. But then it becomes even scary, because if you think somebody is under the influence of anything, the last place they should probably be is on their stomach and with 3 people on top of them. That's the last place that you want someone to be. If you're thinking that maybe they're under the influence and they can't necessarily breathe and all of those things. So I think that was kind of one of the things that I kept on thinking about. So we will definitely pull this over into another episode and give you guys some more information, because we still have to talk about What ends up happening, who ends up testifying, and what ends up being the trigger that we think that the jury probably heard that really goes, okay, that's probably why we're going to convict him. And then I know Darby had a bunch of questions about why wasn't certain evidence allowed in? And people don't realize that. Have a constitutional right to a fair trial, and sometimes a fair trial means evidence that makes you look guilty isn't allowed to come in. So, based on that, thank you guys so very much for coming. I will quickly ask Darby right now, how have you felt at the Club Piranha and Ybor recently?
Great question. It's been quite tumultuous with how people don't want to come in, but my opposing viewpoint where I think it's safe, the security guards hold such an really great standard, a high standard of security.
Good.
I've been there for 11 years and I've never felt not safe walking around Ybor.
Good. So come back out to Ybor, guys. It's safe. You feel good. Thank you for joining into Legal Candy. We'll see you later.